Akina, recently you had I think it was an online discussion that I was one of the audience regarding Bill 10 on Maui, addressing affordable housing. And would like to hear your thoughts about housing and affordable housing. So Dr. Kali'i Akina, please, uh, may we please hear from you next. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lila. I appreciate it. First of all, aloha mai to everyone. Great to see you today, and I'm so delighted that Kokua Council has brought so many fine people together. I really appreciate the invitation, Lila. It's just great to be able to be with you again. You're a good friend, and those of you at Kokua Council are doing good things in terms of educating the public. Senator Stanley Chang, that was a great presentation. I had some questions for you, and I'll reserve that for the Q&A time, but I appreciate all that you're doing to advance affordable housing. And Kim Koko Iwamoto, I'm honored to be on board with you today as well. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Kali'i Akina. I'm a trustee in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and I'm also the president of the Grassroots Institute, a think tank that looks at how we can come up with solutions for the problems that we have. What I'd like to do is share a little bit about the macro view. I love the way that Senator Chang presented an on-the-ground solution, and I'm sure that there are many of these that we can look at. But I also want to take a look at a 20,000 foot level at the economy, at precisely what the problems with the economy and the government are that have resulted in this critical shortage of housing. So if you'll excuse me, I'd like to set up a slideshow now, and if anyone who's watching would just wave your hand, let me know that you actually see my slideshow. Can you see the slide right now, everybody?
Yes.
All right, that's great. You know, what we're really talking about today is solving Hawaii's housing crisis. And I believe that all of us around the table recognize that we must make it possible for everyone in Hawaii to have the opportunity to afford housing. That's an absolute critical for the next several years, next future that we have. Hawaii, unfortunately, has the least affordable housing of any state in the nation. The median price of a single family home has now hit $920,000. That's exorbitant. And it's led to a tremendous outflow of residents from the state of Hawaii. Since 2016, Hawaii's population, if I take net figures, has fallen by 22,000 people. And the rate of people leaving the state has become one of the highest in the nation. At the Grassroots Institute, we have a series of videos and stories of people who've left Hawaii. It's called Why We Left Hawaii. Here are a couple of them. Tom and Ikram Holman said, "The cost of living in Hawaii is just too much. Our tiny Hawaiian home was valued at $25,000 more than our four-bedroom home and on one full acre here where they've moved." You've heard that story on the mainland over and over again. Ashlyn Sakaria said this, "I was born and raised on Oahu. In Hawaii, we could never think of owning a home, but here in Arizona, we actually have a chance to be able to buy a home. As hard as it was to leave Hawaii, we knew we had to do better for our daughter." How many of you have heard that story? I have four children, all of them grown now, living on the mainland, trying to earn their first mortgages because they know that in Hawaii, they're not able to do that yet. Last year, there was a survey done, you may have seen it. It showed that Hawaii's high cost of living, lack of job opportunities, and high housing costs were the top three reasons that people are fleeing the state. So let's go to that question. Why is housing so expensive in Hawaii, and what can be done about it? Well, David Callies is a national expert on this, a former law professor at the William S. Richardson School of Law. He basically says that land use in Hawaii continues to be the most regulated in all the 50 states. It's the way our government regulates land use that creates an artificial shortage. He said it can take 10 years to build housing on a raw piece of land. Of course, the house only takes a few months to build, but getting approval to build a house can take a decade or more. And that's because housing in Hawaii is simply overregulated. Do you realize that we develop housing on less than 5% of the land? In fact, all of our urban and housing development takes place on only 5% of the land in Hawaii. And this means that 95% of our land is set aside for agriculture or conservation. And most of the agriculture land is lying fallow right now. Unfortunately, this has led to an artificial scarcity of land in Hawaii. The land is available for housing, but we just don't release it. So watch the pie chart really closely now, down at the bottom. I'm going to try to move you through this and show what happens if we simply allowed development on 1 percentage point more. That is, we move from 5% to 6%. That would increase the land available for housing by 20%. That's whopping. And what would happen is that the price point would come down if we don't sell it all to rich billionaires from Asia, which we can avoid doing. I'm glad Senator Chang is in favor of that. If we moved from 6% to 7%, increasing by just 2 percentage points, that would increase the land available for housing by 40%. Now let's do it one more time. If we moved from 7% to 8%, that would increase the land available for housing by 60%. And the basic economics lesson is that the price point would go down. And according to David Calades, there would be no negative effect upon the availability of land for agriculture and conservation. Now, we've got to talk a bit about the State Land Use Commission. They are the ones with the oversight over these zoning districts. Any housing project over 15 acres that needs a zoning change must first go and get approval from the State Land Use Commission. Now, this adds tremendous delays to otherwise good projects. The LUC is a quasi-judicial body, which means that if someone intervenes in a hearing, it can throw a project into the court system where it can be delayed for years upon years. Then, if a project clears the LUC, they have to go through all of the same regulatory hoops and hearings at the county level. We've written a report at the Grassroots Institute called Reform the Hawaii LUC to Encourage More Housing. You can get that by going online at grassrootsinstitute.org. And by the way, it's grassroots, singular, no S at the end, grassrootsinstitute.org. Our report recommends allowing projects that are 25 acres to skip the LUC process. Some lawmakers, including Senator Stanley Chang, have rightly tried to pass that, and we've supported him in that effort. Unfortunately, those measures have not passed yet, so there's still more work to be done to educate the public and lawmakers about this common sense reform. Our report, Build Up or Build Out, which is a separate report, shows that Hawaii's housing shortage could be resolved if we just allowed either building up or building out. The report shows that allowing a house to be built out would be the least expensive way to produce more housing. But it isn't the only way to create housing. We can also build up. There are appropriate places to do so. But there are so many regulations that get in the way of that too. Height limits, for example, prevent buildings over a certain number of stories. Many counties in the state only allow 4 to 5 story buildings, and this significantly limits housing. Affordable housing requirements are another policy that can have unintended consequences over housing. These regulations require a certain percentage of the project to be sold at below market rates. For example, take the island of Maui. They're getting ready to enact a policy approved by their county council to require all 201H housing projects to be 75% affordable. What that would do is give Maui County the second most restrictive housing policy in the nation. It sounds good, but let's look at what that really means. The last time Maui County increased their affordable housing requirements, only 14 houses were built over the following 7 years. The only places with higher affordable housing requirements are 3 municipalities that have 100% affordable mandates: Santa Paula in California, Oxnard in California, and Aquinnah in Massachusetts. After they enacted the mandate, housing growth in those 3 municipalities declined by more than 60% over the following 10 years. And I believe that Oahu lawmakers need to look at that very carefully as a lesson to avoid any attempts to increase the affordable housing requirement. Now, why does a higher affordable housing percentage become a problem for developers and producing housing? It sounds like something we would want. We would want to have a project maybe filled with 75% affordable homes that can be accessed by people with lower incomes. But the reality is, as they say in economics, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. This has to be paid for. And if developers are paying for it, it's a real disincentive to building. Here's a real-life example from Council Member Yukilei Sugimura, who gave this to me last week when I interviewed her on one of our interview programs. She said there's a project in West Maui whose total cost is $64.6 million for 88 units. That means it costs about $735,000 per unit. To sell the units as affordable, they need to guarantee that the house is actually sold for $350,000. Now, that's less than half of what it costs just to build it. Who's going to come and do that? What developer will do it? Under Maui's new 75% requirement, that means the developer would have to sell 3/4 of the units they build at a substantial loss. Now, the developer then needs to find other money to make up the difference. How are they going to do it? Either by raising the price of the remaining 25 homes they can sell, and that's going to contribute to inflation and the cost of housing, and it's going to put these massive millionaire mansions right there in the project. Or they're going to have to seek government subsidies. And what that means is that we, as the taxpayers and the citizens of Maui, are going to have to pay for the difference. The bottom line is that developers simply won't build the affordable housing. They'll go off and do other projects. The system is well intended, but the effect will be less housing for everyone. But what this does is force developers to create ultra high-end housing to compensate for the houses sold at below market prices. This contributes ultimately to the income disparity in a place like Maui. Now, this approach of requiring a certain amount of affordable housing for affordable housing projects can work if the figure is below 50%. But once the requirement reaches 50% or above, it becomes less profitable to build housing communities and more profitable to just build mansions. In other words, it's also a myth to say that developers would rather build mansions than affordable housing. We've talked to a lot of developers, and they really would prefer to build large-scale affordable housing projects, and doing so could be profitable for them. At the heart of the matter, the high price of housing is the result of our supply problem. And without enough housing, the price to buy and to rent both go up. In order to have sufficient affordable housing, we've got to ensure that there are incentives to build more homes. And what that means is working together to remove barriers and burdens that slow down the building of affordable housing and prevent new solutions and innovations that will address the housing crisis. Now, for example, we have a report on our website produced by Grassroots Institute called How to Build Affordable Thriving Neighborhoods. This shows at least 50 ways to reform regulations to allow for more housing. Here are some examples. Waive some building code requirements for temporary homeless shelters. Allow taller buildings. Allow residences in commercial districts. Allow office parks and malls to build housing. Reduce the political approval process. If a project complies with existing zoning, it shouldn't require more than a planning department approval and building permits to proceed. Publish pre-approved plans for common projects like accessory dwelling units or single-family homes, then permit expedited review for projects using these plans. Allow smaller housing and smaller lot sizes. Additionally, we find ourselves in the good company of Senator Chang again, who sponsored several zoning reform bills that we supported this legislative session. These include block-level upzoning, which means to allow homeowners in a neighborhood to vote to increase housing density in their block, or allowing for the creation of fourplex units on lots where single-family dwelling units are permitted, allowing religious and educational institutions to build residential units on their own land regardless of current zoning restrictions, requiring counties to authorize the building of detached dwelling units that meet certain minimum standards. While we might have different perspectives on the housing crisis and how to solve it, and while there are many potential solutions that are being debated, it's important to remember that we all share the same goal. We want to increase the supply of housing in Hawaii. We want to make it possible for everyone to afford housing. And with those shared goals, we should be able to work together. We like to say, e hana kako, let's work together. Well, I'd like to turn off for a moment my slide presentation and just conclude with this thought. I came here today to present to you some of the research of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, and I've done that. But as you know, I also wear the hat of a trustee in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And my heart is not only for all people of Hawaii, but for the Hawaiian people to be able to have the housing that they need and deserve. I believe that one of the solutions to our housing problems is to ensure that Hawaiians are able to get the housing we need. We've got to come up with solutions where the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands work together to end the 27,000 person waiting list for Hawaiian homelands. And there are many innovative solutions that are being developed. I'll be glad to respond during the Q&A time to these. But once again, my mahalo to Kokua Council for this opportunity to talk about a very crucial issue. And I'm just so glad we're all working together to provide housing for everyone in Hawaii. Thank you very much.